hanger out in the market. Okay, next slide. And why paper? Why did we decide to use paper? Well, the next slide. One of the reasons is because paper is the only material that's recycled at the store level. It's recyclable with all the boxes that come in, and boxes are universally recycled at stores. The other thing is that we started looking at the various materials that hangers are made out of, and we did an LCA dive into it and found that paper was far less demanding on the environment. It had a lower LCA footprint. Plastic hangers take 1,000 years to break down in landfills. It's 100% recyclable. The material is FSC certified. You can eat our hangers if you need a little fiber. And it's 100% closed loop, and no other material that is used to make hangers is that way. Next slide. And we've really done a very deep dive on this and looked at everything that's involved with hangers and why our hangers are better. And the hanger companies right now are doing recycled plastic, saying that's very sustainable. It's not. 100% of those go into landfill. 100% of wood hangers go into landfills because they have multiple materials that can't be separated. They have oil-based stains and sealers. They're not compostable. There's nothing you can do with a wood hanger after its end of its life but landfill it. Next slide. And we've done something where we were able to go to our clients and give them a real-time LCA showing the energy savings by switching over from plastic to our hangers. And we can show how many loads of laundry can be done with the CO2 that's saved, how many showers you can take with the waters that's saved using our hangers. And this is something that's very important because it's an easy tool to be able to communicate not only to their stockholders, but to their stakeholders as well. Next slide. And one of the reasons why so many hangers are landfilled every year, approximately 20 billion of them are landfilled, is because many clothes are shipped to the United States on their very own hanger, so they're just used once. Our hangers are thinner. We can fit more garments into packing cartons. That means that for shipping 2,000 men's clothes, shirts, it takes 4 containers to ship. If you're using a plastic hanger, that same number of shirts would take 5 containers to ship. So it's sustainable in so many different ways, and this is why it's powerful to use sustainable design, because it's just not about the material. It's making the product smarter throughout its entire use. Next slide. And this shows the 14 touch points of a hanger that goes on a piece of clothing overseas and is shipped to the retail store. And we can fit up to 20% more garments into our boxes. And that means 20% less shipping costs, 20% less labor to unload and unload, 20% fewer boxes coming into retail stores. All this ends up saving environmentally and makes it less of a stress on our environment. Next slide. And finally, another add-on that we've brought to the hangers is the branding aspect of it, the marketing aspect. This makes it more valuable as well. And right now we're getting a tremendous amount of interest in Europe because of the single plastic ban that's there. And many apparel companies are coming to us asking us to come up with a sustainable solution for it. And it makes it a lot easier when you're selling a product which is all these value points, such as being able to brand them with colors for new seasonal offerings or for sale items or for a new product launch or something. So we're trying to make hangers into a harder working tool and not just a anti-gravity device, which is really what hangers are all about. Next slide. So that's it. Really, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's sustainable design is about more than just material. It's about really thinking about a product all the way through its use, its life cycle, and making it more valuable and less of a disposable item.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Gary. And I would like at this point to introduce Kirsten Keys, one of our board members. Kirsten, you're on mute.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you. Thank you, Gary. You're doing great work.
Yeah, and so Kirsten is going to do the overall moderation for this happy hour. But I think with that, I'd like to invite now Isabel to come back and introduce our second speaker.
Yeah, so our second speaker, I'm not sure, Christine, if you want to share the presentation.
Oops. Yeah, I'm done. Oops. And bear with me, I'm multitasking or trying. Here we go.
Yay. So our second speaker is Esther Chai. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But Esther is the manager of member engagement at Sustainable Apparel Coalition for the Americas region. And Esther has also worked as the senior manager of reuse and donations at the New York City Department of Sanitation, including overseeing the launch of Refashion Week New York City, which is super cool to me. But yeah, Esther.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for the introduction. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you. One moment, please. So you should be seeing mountains, cooling lake, everything look good. Okay, great. So thank you so much for having me here. As Isabel said perfectly, my name is Esther Chichai. I'm the manager of member engagement for the Americas region at the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. I have quite a bit of content to get through, so I'm going to be zippy, but feel free to drop a question in the comments if anything is not clear. So who is the SAC? So we are a membership-based organization founded in 2009 that's worked over the last decade to develop and launch a core suite of end-to-end sustainability measurement tools for the apparel, footwear, and home textiles industry. It's our mission to really transform the way business is done, what business means, to transform it for exponential impact. And our member companies really want to give back more than they take to the planet and its people. And so a little bit about our history. In 2009, the unlikely duo Walmart and Patagonia came together with a radical idea to create a standardized approach for environmental and social sustainability performance within the footwear and apparel industry. And at that time, if you think way back to 2009, if you were in the apparel industry or were familiar with it, it was very apples and oranges. Everybody had their very own sustainability measurement systems. Everybody was starting to think a bit more about sustainability, but nobody had the same definition of sustainability. Nobody had the same definition of what it means to be better, to improve. And so these two companies came together and they put out a call to industry leaders saying, we have to create a shared language for measurement. And so that is exactly what they did. All right, so here's just a little snapshot of where we are 10 years down the line. So we have over 260 member organizations representing 36 countries from across the global value chain. And we represent a very significant share of the global market in the apparel industry. And to give you a look at a couple of our members, you'll probably see several brands, retailers, third-party retailers, and holding groups that you recognize and that you have purchased and that you own. And brands and retailers typically join the SAC. They join for many reasons, but as members, we give them support to advance and build structure around their sustainability goals. And they also get to play an active role in developing the Higg Index suite of tools, which we'll talk about in a second. And you can see that they range in size also, from really big multinational holding groups to very small, medium-sized enterprises that may specialize in one item. So this is really meant for, membership is meant for any company at any stage of any size along their sustainability journey. So looking here, we have a lot of manufacturer members too, equal partnership across the global supply chain is very important to us at the SAC, and we want to make sure that sustainability goals are not built on the backs of manufacturers, that they are built in partnership all across the entire value chain, that everybody has a seat at the table as we're developing our vision for the industry. We also have several members that are non-governmental organizations, government entities, service providers, academic institutions. So they all run the gamut, and they all play a very important role too in making sure that the full scope of information is again brought to the table as we're developing a structure to make this large scale impact across the apparel industry. So I keep mentioning this Higg Index suite of tools. This is really what the SAC was founded to build. So all of our members have come together, they have developed this tool. And it is a suite of tools that aims to create standardized measurement for value chain sustainability. And I'll tell you exactly what that means. So we have 3 areas of tools. We have tools at the product level, measuring sustainability of materials and finished products. We have measurement tools at the facility level. So these would be tools that factories use to measure both their environmental and their social and labor outcomes and give them pathways for improvement. And we have a tool for brands and retailers to be able to assess all of their social and labor outcomes at the brand level. So taken all together, the Higg Index suite of tools is again a full end-to-end sustainability measurement index. It's the first in any consumer goods industry, any industry period, and it allows for the holistic measurement of social and environmental impacts throughout the entire value chain. And so using this full system of tools together helps companies measure and manage issues like environmental stewardship, social responsibility, supplier relations, and the goal is to ultimately foster the resilience that the industry needs to survive and to do better in a post-pandemic world and beyond. So in addition to developing the tools over the last 10 years, the SAC has also developed a robust verification program because especially when you're looking at social and labor, it's very, very important to make sure that the data is accurate. You do not have a solid baseline for improvement unless your data is verified by an accredited verifier. And so we built out structures for that. And we've also begun to build and craft a framework for transparency. Our goal is eventually to make sure that the Higg Index suite of tools is the #1 most trusted framework for environmental and social communication between brands and their value chain partners and also to consumers. And so this transparency framework, again, that is credible based on verified data and that is understandable to help consumers make decisions has always been a huge priority for the SAC. So we've been a little bit busy over the last decade and hope to continue to be so. So just to take a quick look at the Higg Index suite of tools, as I mentioned, we have 2 tools that factories fill out on an annual basis. One of them is the facility environmental module. And so that gives facilities an overall score, a GHG emissions score, as well as scores in the high level categories that you see listed here. And one thing that's important to note, I don't have time to go into the full detail, but it gives facilities a pathway for continuous improvement. So instead of disincentivizing or punishing any undesirable outcomes, it meets facilities where they are. It's a lot of work and it gives a pathway for improvement. And so the same can be said for the facility social and labor module, which measures social and labor practices in these areas that you see listed here. And the questionnaire within the facility social and labor module was developed by the Social and Labor Convergence Program, which aims to reduce audit fatigue throughout the industry. So when you think of a facility having many, many brand partners, they'll be filling out many different social audits, and that can be exhausting, you know. And so the idea here is to create convergence around one shared social and labor framework, which is in the facility social and labor module, and allow facilities to turn their effort toward improvement instead of to meeting many different audit standards. So at the brand and retailer level, we also have a module for them. So it's called the brand and retail module. And this is based on a risk assessment process. So facilities or brands are asked to conduct a robust social and environmental risk assessment, and then to select the most salient risks within their operations from 27 different social and environmental risk areas. And then within those risk areas, they again are presented with these pathways for continuous improvement year over year. They get scores in different life cycle areas along their production. They get overall scores. And again, here the idea is to identify hotspots where they already have very strong building blocks and where they could use to improve based on their salient risks. Finally, we have our product tools. We have the Material Sustainability Index, which takes a life cycle assessment approach to create a common language around assessing the environmental impacts of materials from cradle to gate. So this is from the point of raw material extraction to the point where the material leaves the factory to be made into a finished product. There are 5 environmental criteria in the Material Sustainability Index, which you see listed on the screen here. And how this sort of works in a brief nutshell is that each material is broken down into its manufacturing processes. So you see those listed out here in the slide for cotton, raw material source, yarn formation, etc. And by adjusting those manufacturing processes, a design team, for instance, can get an exact spec of the material that they use, and they could see where in the manufacturing process most of the impacts come from. And so this allows the design team to really make just small switches in the materials that they're using, or to see how one material choice plays into their overall impact and sustainability strategy. So it's a fantastically useful tool. And it the material information pulls into our final tool, and I know I'm a little bit over time here, which is the HIG product module, which gives a full life cycle assessment of a finished product. So this tool is truly revolutionary. It allows companies to compare a finished product to a finished product along its full life cycle. And so it pulls the material information from the Material Sustainability Index, and then it adds methodology for impacts after this product has left the factory. So it looks at impacts coming from logistics and retail, product care, such as washing, ironing, number of wears, and then also consumer use and end of use. So it's looking at the full life cycle perspective of a product, which is going to be setting Emily up for her presentation next. And the final thing I'd like to leave you with is now we have these tools, we're moving into our second decade of action. Now what? So the transparency that I talked about, this has really been the end goal the entire time. So allow the entire apparel, footwear, home textiles, hopefully more industries to come together to agree on a shared language for measuring and improving. And finally, to take this information and put it into a transparency framework that allows consumers to make more sustainable decisions and to change the industry from the outside in. And so I'm very happy to say that we've launched the first consumer-facing piece of our on-product transparency framework on May 27th. We're super excited. So this first piece of the transparency framework takes data from the Material Sustainability Index. So it gives you the information on the materials that an item on an e-commerce site is composed of, and it compares them to reliable, verified industry benchmarks. So it gives consumers an idea of, in comparison to the average, how is this product performing based on its materials. So down the line, we hope to make sure that this consumer-facing structure incorporates that social and environmental data from across the full spectrum of the HIG Index tools. And so that's what we're working toward this year and beyond. And we encourage you to check it out. The royal we. You can see it in action if you go to Amazon, for instance, and if you look up HIG Index material seal in the search bar, it'll pull up several items that have this HIG Index material seal on it. It's also on H&M's e-commerce site. It's also on the Norwegian brand Nerona's e-commerce site. And we're working with our second cohort now. We'll be onboarding several more of our member brands over the next couple of years. So hopefully this is something that you'll be seeing quite regularly. The power is in your hands as consumers to shape where the industry is going, and definitely reach out if you have questions. Thank you so much.
Wow, so that was a lot that you covered, Esther, and definitely very, very interesting. So really appreciated to hear about that. I don't know if you wanted to add something to that, Kirsten?
No, let's hear from our final speaker.
I will just roll, and then we'll have plenty of time for like breakout room discussions. All right, so let me get this started. And Isabel, whenever you're ready to introduce Emily, we are ready for you.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. Emily, our last speaker is Emily Schneider. who is the Sustainability Program Manager at Trove Recommerce, which is a white label resale business located in San Francisco. And at Trove, Emily focuses on circular business innovations and, examining the environmental impact of purchasing used items instead of new ones. So yeah, Emily, handing it to you.
Okay, so just give me 1 sec here as I pull Emily's presentation. Here we go. Oops, and then, okay. All right, Emily, I'm ready for you.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really excited to be here, and it's wonderful to follow just some great stories. There's a ton of amazing work happening in the industry at the moment, and as Esther said, we have decades to go, and this is a really exciting kind of beginning of the next decade. So with that, if you want to move to the next slide. So before I talk about Trove, I want to just talk about the system. So there's a couple things that I think we focus at Trove. We focus a lot on kind of what's happening in retail, and then what we do is re-commerce or resale. So kind of over the last 20 or so years, as kind of GDP has gone up, the actual utilization of clothes is going down. And I plan to tie into Esther's measurement and kind of talk a little bit about how those tools are actually helping to inform the way that products are designed. And we have huge aspirations for what all of this data and information can do. But essentially, there are a lot of clothing items being produced every year. There's varying numbers about what the exact number is. Some say 100 billion items. But the whole idea, and focusing in on fast fashion as opposed to all of fashion, there's really this overarching issue that folks are not using their clothing all the way through until it's completely used up. So the word consume, I believe the Latin root is to use up. And so we use up bars, but we don't necessarily use up our clothing. We use it for a while and then we discard it. There's a couple questions in the chat about donation options, as well as extended producer responsibility. And we'll get to that because I think it all really ties into the big picture here. If you want to go to the next slide. So one thing, and I like what Gary was saying, around resources. So his hangers it's a very sustainable way to look at using resources and utilizing the resources that we have. So our current linear system of producing clothing is just that, it's linear. So there's a ton of resource loss at every single phase. So items are produced, they're used, and they're disposed of. We're not necessarily, there's a small percentage that's being actually cycled back into the garments themselves. But we have a ton of work to do on that front. And so I think the overarching message for us at Trove and the goal is to extend the life and that use phase. So how much more life can we get out of the high quality garments that are out there? I think you can move to the next slide. So we have good news, and I'll get into what Trove does in just a second. But the good news is that selling used items we're on trend right now. So it is growing. There's basically expected growth of resale of used items versus sale of new items is expected to grow kind of almost exponentially above what retail is growing at. So you see 5x over the next 5 years for retail. And then, sorry that there's a typo there, but re-commerce is expected to grow 25%. So who's Trove? Why am I here? Next slide, please. So I'm our sustainability program manager at Trove. And what Trove is a white label re-commerce solution. What is white label? What is re-commerce? So white label is, I'm gonna use Patagonia as an example, which of course is wonderful because they're so, they're kind of pivoting the industry, and they have been for a long time, with the foundation of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, among other 1% for the planet, just some amazing initiatives that are out there. So what white label re-commerce is Patagonia has a secondhand line called Wornwear. So if you go on their website, you can click to a tab at the top that says Wornwear, and you click over, and then actually Trove is running that whole website there. So all of the products that you find that are used and on that website are actually in our warehouse. Why that's important is that Patagonia has this incredibly strong brand, and they have a relationship with all of their customers. And that relationship is trust. They're building garments with high quality materials in high quality ways. Their consumers know that. And so the idea that they would then believe in their products enough to sell them again, extend the life even further than just the single owner, is kind of why we exist and why we are considered white label. So no one really needs to know who Trove is. I mean, you guys will now know who we are, but the idea is that the brands that you can see on this page here, Patagonia, Eileen Fisher, and REI being our first three, basically they trusted us to help them to build these secondhand channels. And what that does is take the first life and then give it a second, maybe a third, and even fourth life. So think about that green fleece that you got a decade ago that you wore as much as you felt like wearing it. It's just not worn out. You can now bring that back to a Patagonia store, and it can get a new life with a new owner. So that's kind of what Trove does in a nutshell. From soup to nuts, all of the inventory comes into our warehouse. We inspect it. We will clean and repair it. We'll work with some very skilled repair vendors. You know, if a more detailed repair is needed, we'll photograph it, we'll stock it, and we'll fulfill it as if we're Patagonia or any of the brands here. We can go to the next slide, please. Great. So we're going to get into this idea of displacement a little bit in a couple minutes here. I know I'm going to try and, Christine, move a little bit quickly so we have time for questions and discussion at the end. But the idea here is, if you look at kind of down there at the CO2e displaced, let's imagine that 10% of a mainline business, the original garments that are produced, is completely replaced with used items. So we just swap out new with used. I mean, we're looking at a huge amount of metric tons of CO2e that would be saved each year. So that's a huge deal. And that's only 10%. And so just imagine, as we kind of scale the resale of all sorts of high quality garments, how much savings we will see and kind of on the climate ledger. Can you go to the next slide, please? So I think the thing I love to scream from the rooftops is buy new, buy used, it does not matter. What does matter is that you take care of the garments and then make sure that you pass them along. So I bought this shirt new probably a decade ago. I'm not a big shopper, but I'm going to take care of it. I wash next owner. So I bought it new, but I will give it a new life as a used item. And just like if you buy a used item and you take care of it, it can continue to give life in its third kind of life cycle. And so the idea is getting back to Esther's circle around the different phases of life. There's the use phase, and then there's resale and repairing, and keeping kind of extending those portions of that circle are kind of what Trove is all about. And really it makes a huge difference on the planet. So the idea for us is the closet is part of the supply chain. So with our brands, what we do is there's a couple of different ways you can trade in, but essentially I could take this, if it was a Patagonia shirt, I could mail it to Patagonia, I could bring it into the store, and I'm trading it in for credit. And so then I get credit towards either a used or a new item. Take the next slide, please. So what that does, by basically helping folks to bring in their used items and trade them in to buy either something new or something used, is it allows jackets or fleeces or t-shirts for that matter to have multiple owners and a longer, more interesting life. So you think about, we're stewards of our homes, we're stewards of our clothing. So in this example here, 3 jackets were produced. They kind of sat unused in a closet, or they were used for one adventure and not used for a couple of years and were just sitting idle. And instead, if those 3 jackets were compressed into one, you could get all of those life cycles into the one jacket. And so that's kind of the perfect example of 3 jackets needing to be produced versus 1. Again, think about what's happening for the planet. Less resources are needing to be extracted because we're using all of the resources from that jacket. Next slide, please. Got about a minute and a half left, the slide after. So similar to what Esther and the SAC and the Higg Index are doing, and we're huge believers. I know you didn't see Trove's logo on the site. I'm working on it. But the whole idea is that more folks that are using the Higg Index and that are talking about how they're using a common language across the industry, a standard way to talk about the production of garments, the better. And why? Because imagine if we are trying to measure the carbon or water or whatever savings from buying used instead of new, if we had a baseline of the life cycle and what materials were used, what the supply chain was like, how things were transported, and we were speaking in a way that was standardized across the industry, we would all be speaking the same language. We would all understand kind of a leveled out impact of what really are you saving by buying something used instead of new, or by buying Patagonia instead of another brand? You know, kind of what are the savings, and we're kind of equalizing the playing field by speaking the same language. So if you go to the next, maybe 2 slides down, I'm not sure. That's fine. Either one, don't need to read it because I'm going to talk. But we're basically trying to measure, similar to how the Higg Index is looking at new items, we're trying to look at standardizing how we talk about used items. So we're looking not at number of wears, because I could wear a jacket 7 times and climb 7 mountains, and my mom could have the same jacket and walk down the streets of New York City 7 times. So 7 wears is going to be really different in the actual wear on the garment. We're thinking a lot about life expectancy. So is there a thread pull? What does that imply? How much life has been, kind of what portion of life has been removed from the item, from that wear versus the next wear? And the second item, or the second thing that we're thinking about, is displacement. So if I go on worn wear and I buy a vest because it's cute, and then I think, well, there's this new vest that I've been waiting for it to come out, and I buy the other vest as well, I'm not really displacing the purchase. I've now purchased 2 vests. And so we're looking at industry research and hopefully beginning some of our own to really look at, when someone buys something used, are they truly replacing something new? And so kind of wrapping it back into that question around Oregon, I think it's Oregon and Maine, extended producer responsibility. The idea is imagine if people were buying used and we started to realize that 1,000 jackets used to have to be made, and now only 800 do. Well, a brand who's producing those 1,000 jackets could have been taxed up front on having 1,000 jackets made, 200 of which are kind of surplus and they aren't needed. Instead, they could have produced the 800 because they knew those 200 would be sold used. And now they're basically leveling the playing field. So we're thinking about kind of how are we incentivizing actually producing what we need to versus trying to exponentially grow the production of clothing. And so our opinion, and I can't speak for the SAC, we're actually working, really exciting, for COP26, which is a big conference later this year. We've been working with John Kerry and his team to put together some information around what it would take to basically have the policy, which is extended producer responsibility, become a reality in the US. The idea being that if you're taxed up front, let's say Patagonia, every brand who produces will be taxed up front, and those for each item that's produced, and those dollars will go to recycling. So it'll go to basically promote and help to grow the industry of what happens when you can't sell the items, or when they're unsellable or ripped, or whatever it is. Right now, I think the answer is, for the most part, mechanical shredding. So, think about the Amazon box that you get that's lined because there's something cold in there. Those are clothing shreds that have been put inside that box, but that's only one more use. So the idea is that extended producer responsibility could help us to close the circle. So I know we've all gone a lot over, so I'm going to stop there, but hope that was useful, and appreciate being part of this panel and having the opportunity to speak with everyone.
Well, thank you. And I think without any further ado, I'll just pass it on to Kirsten to do some moderation. I mean, just so much to learn, absorb, and share.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, that was fantastic. And I have learned a ton. I love how Gary Barker was talking about how you can eat our hangers if you need a little fiber. Esther, is great talking about transparency at your fingertips. That's fantastic. And Emily, I love how you talk about buying new and buy used, but take care of it to extend that circle. So I would like to, we have a lot of questions in the chat room. It might be useful to go to our breakout rooms for a little bit, and then we can come back and try and answer some global chat room questions.
Sorry, so let me launch that if you want to do that, Kirsten, but I'm also a little bit aware of time. So let me just add the questions in the chat. And then, so those of you who have to go, but if you can stay a little bit longer with us, that would be great. Okay, so just give me 1 sec. Here we go. So that's our 2 guiding questions for the breakout room. So one is around, as individuals, how you think you could change your actions related to fashion. So we already learned quite a bit around that. And then the second question is about how to raise awareness in relating to the fashion industry and, well, I guess not just its negative impacts on sustainability and labor practices, but also kind of thinking about what can be done. All right, I think with
Great. Christine, you're on mute. That's okay. I think we're going to break out into our chat rooms now for probably about 5 or 10 minutes. And then we'll come back together and we can answer a couple of the global questions that are in our chat.
Yeah, I'll give you 7 minutes because we'll be over. So happy discussion.
Bye.
But I think a big thing about raising awareness is people, I'm in the sustainable
shirt was beautiful, and I turned it into curtains.
Wow, great.
It was.
Do they have?
Welcome back, everyone. All right, so I think as people are coming back in, Kirsten, do you want to wrap it up?
Sure, yeah, we are at 6:34 and just want to say thank you to everybody for participating tonight. And I learned so much. I hope you did too. This is a area of the industry I just didn't know about. And we're really thankful to have all of you here with us tonight, Gary Barker and Esther and Emily, to enlighten us and help us, reduce our load on the planet. What you're doing is great work. And I know we had so many questions in the chat box, so people were really engaged, and I just want to say thank you. And join us for our next happy hour.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, if it's okay with the speakers, we'll compile and we'll try to get some responses to your questions. So if you have some even after the happy hour, just feel free to send us an email. So I'm just going to type in my email address so you can write directly. Maybe just use the subject line, questions for fashion happy hour or something like that. And if you have resources, we'd like to know about them as well. Our interns have compiled some resources that I'm going to share with everyone that registered, and we can add more to the list. So I think with that, thank you again for coming. Great happy hour. Thank you, speakers, for sharing all the amazing work that you're doing in this area. And I hope you'll be able to join us on September the 30th to talk about EVs, charging, and infrastructure. So have a great evening.
Good night.
All right.
Thanks, speakers. That was
Bye-bye.
really important.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks all. It was great.
Appreciate it. Thank you all.
Really,
Yes,
really great meeting.
wonderful. Wonderful.
Thank you. See you next time.
Bye-bye.